Hey YouTubers, and welcome back to Tony the Technician's channel. And today we're going to be going into part one of the rear end swap for the third gen Camaro. So if you guys follow the channel, you guys may know that I purchased the Hawks 8.8 rear end. If you don't follow the channel, go ahead and check out the previous video that I posted on the third gen Camaro, where I go over the options that I chose for my Hawks 8.8 and everything, just kind of a look over of it so others out there can see it before they purchase it if they're considering it, because there's not a whole lot of videos on the Hawks 8.8. But it's a great rear end, so go ahead and check out that video. I also have a video on the rear brake setup that I went with, going over all of it. So go ahead and check out those videos if you would like. But in part one, we're gonna be focusing on removal, and then part two and part three will be installation. I'm not sure how many parts there will be, 2, possibly 3. We're gonna start with removing the parking brake cables at the splitter underneath in the trans tunnel, because we're gonna be running new cables to adapt to the new brakes or parking brakes on the new rear end. And then we'll be removing the lower control arms, upper and lower panhard bar. There's really not much to it. The shocks and springs, simple enough. We'll get it all out, and then I'm gonna drop my fuel tank, dump all the old fuel out. And then in the next part, we'll be installing the rear end, new tubular lower control arms, upper and lower panhard bars. We'll be installing a sway bar because my car doesn't actually have a rear sway bar, so we'll be installing one of those. We'll be installing Viking coilovers and all of that. So not only in these videos will you see the 10 bolt being removed and the new Hawks 8.8 going in, but a lot of the rear suspension will be replaced as well. So if you're doing any of that, lower control arm, panhard bars, torque arm, sway bar, coilovers, any of that, it'll all be included in these parts. 2, possibly 3 parts. So I really hope you guys enjoy. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, feel free to drop a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer them for you. And other than that, I really hope you guys enjoy. Let's go ahead and start getting this thing out of there. Here's the new Hawks rear end, coilovers, upper and lower panhard bars, lower control arms, all that good stuff. Here's the old 10 bolt, the lower control arms that are in there now, which are like a eBay or Amazon special. Same thing with the lower panhard bar. I do have my rear mounted trans cooler back here, so we'll just have to work around these lines. Other than that, the first thing, obviously you need to get it jacked up and sitting on the frame. Obviously you can't put the jack stands underneath the rear end because the rear end's got to come down. So I just have my jack supporting it, and the jack stands underneath the frame of the car. We have my drive shaft sitting down there. First thing we're gonna do is remove the parking brake splitter. For mine, I needed a 13mm ratcheting wrench and either another wrench or a set of pliers, and I'll show you what you have to do. So here we're looking at my tail shaft of the trans cross member, the torque arm, and when you look up in the trans tunnel, so here we're looking at the rear end of the car. In the trans tunnel, you'll see this. This is where the cable comes down from your parking brake handle, and that's where it's mounted. And then you have the splitter right here. I put some WD-40 on it, and then you see the nut on the end of that long threaded shaft. That will be all the way up against this metal plate right here, and you'll just have to remove that all the way. Hold on to that nut unless you have a replacement for it, because I'm not sure if the kit comes with one specifically for this, because in the kit it replaces all of this cable as well. But we're going to be going from right here where it splits. We're basically going to be replacing this with a new splitter and new cables from here back. So we're going to be reusing this threaded shaft right here. So I just held on with the pliers right here on the square portion. Took a few minutes to remove that nut from the threaded shaft. So that's step one in getting the parking brake cables out. Once you have that, you can slide this off, and then we can go ahead and kind of unroute all of the original parking brake cable, how it's routed through to the rear end. So once you have the parking brake cables disconnected from the trans tunnel, you can kind of unroute them and just lay them down. Now keep in mind, my drive shaft has been out for a very long time. If yours is still in, that is something you're going to have to remove, whether it's at the beginning or the end of the job. It's going to have to come out before the rear end can drop. I suggest removing it before doing the parking brake cables, because it will be in the way, or it will make it kind of a pain to remove the parking brake cables with the drive shaft installed. But in order to remove the drive shaft, it's extremely simple, just by removing the fasteners here, sliding the drive shaft forward so the U-joint can come out of here, and then pulling it out of the transmission tail shaft. Also, keep in mind that I am replacing all of my items. You do not have to remove all of the items I am in this video. I'm only removing everything completely because I'm replacing it, like my shocks. If you're not replacing them, you can just remove the fastener at the bottom where it's connected to the rear end. You can leave the upper mount. There's no need to go in here and remove the shock completely. So, only if you're replacing the shocks will you remove it from top and bottom. If not, just undo it at the rear end. Same thing with the lower control arms. I'm going to be removing it at the front and the rear where it connects to the car and the rear end. If you're not replacing them, just remove the fastener on the rear end. And then same thing goes with the upper panhard bar and everything like that. So just keep that in mind throughout this video. I'm removing everything. You don't necessarily have to remove everything. You just have to make sure that it's disconnected from the rear end. What I'm doing is removing the shocks. You can do this really in any order as long as you're safe and you have the rear end supported. You can do the rear panhard bars, the rear lower control arms, the shocks. It doesn't really matter what order you do it in as long as you have the rear end supported. So I'm starting with the shocks after the drive shaft and parking brake cables. If you're not replacing the shocks, then you don't need to worry about this part. If you are, inside here, you're going to have access to the top portion of your shock right here at where normally it would be right behind your rear seats. Right here on each side, I have my carpet pulled back and you can access it. And you're going to have something that looks similar to this. They lock together and then you're going to have the bushing and spacer and it's going to be on there like that. These are 14 millimeter. These are not the stock shocks, so yours may or may not be that size, but if you're not replacing them and you're just removing the rear end, then you can just simply remove this fastener here, which is a 19 millimeter, and now you can slide the shock forward and off of the rear end. So now we have both shocks removed from both sides of the rear end completely. So if you wanted to, you could slightly lower the rear end, and now you could remove your springs as well. Next, I'll be removing the lower panhard bar that runs across. This side is mounted to the body of the car, the other end to the rear end. For mine, it is going to be an 18 millimeter and a 21 millimeter. Yeah, simple enough. I'm going to go ahead and remove the lower control arms. If you're not replacing your lower control arms, you can just remove this fastener here. If you're replacing the lower control arm, remove this fastener and the one located on the body of the car. And for me, which may not be the same as you, mine are going to be 18 millimeter fastener. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the one on the rear end and the one on the car side on both sides of the vehicle. And then here I have my little wooden dollies, and I have a couple 2x4s on here, so when I lower this, hopefully the drum will sit right in between these two 2x4s and I can roll it out easily. So now I'll go ahead, do the same thing, and remove this fastener here, and then we'll move on to the other side. Now I'm going to lower the rear end. If you guys are not replacing your upper panhard bar, you do not need to remove it. It just goes from this side of the body to the upper portion of the body on the other side. So if you're not replacing that, then you can go ahead and leave it. At this point, I'm going to lower the rear end and remove the brake line at the junction on the other side. We're on the driver's side, and here's the junction where your main brake line comes in, and then it goes to this flex line that will then split on the rear end. We're going to go ahead and disconnect it here. Once that's out, then this can kind of move freely. Then you just want to make sure that you have the line capped off here, as you can see there. Made a little bit of a mess, not too bad. And I just had a couple of these guys laying around, so if you have anything like that, go ahead and use those. Find whatever fits best as quickly as you can, so you don't make too big of a mess. But it's simple enough. Okay, so now we have the lower panhard bar, lower control arms, drive shaft, parking brake cables, and brake lines all disconnected. Now I'm going to go ahead and lower the rear end onto these dollies, and then we'll go around to the driver's side and we will remove the two fasteners holding the torque arm on. Okay, so the rear end is completely down. Now we can go ahead and disconnect the torque arm. Here are the two fasteners that hold the rear torque arm, or the torque arm, onto the rear end. So for mine, it's going to be 21 millimeter. It may be different for you, I'm not sure, but it is just these two fasteners here. Now you can go ahead and remove the torque arm from the rear end. Keep in mind that the nose of this rear end is going to be heavier, so it's going to want to tip forward. The only thing keeping it from rolling forward right now is the torque arm. So I'm going to go ahead and slide my jack up underneath the nose as soon as we get it removed. Now I've set the torque arm down on the ground. Now we can slowly pull the rear end out. So those dollies definitely made easy work of removing the rear end. Here we have the panhard bar and lower control arms, new rear end, and the old rear end. And all of the new components going in. And then I also have new torque arm bolts as well. So new hardware for everything and new components. So stay tuned for the next video. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that on removing the old 10 bolt, please feel free to drop a comment down below. Hopefully I provided a decent amount of information on that. And hopefully you guys were able to see a good amount. So if you guys enjoyed, please make sure to hit that thumbs up. Once again, leave a comment down below of your guys' thoughts. And as always, subscribe if you're not a subscriber. See you guys next time.